Okay, today's daf Bez Hashem is Masechta Avodah Zarah Daf Nun, number 50. We'll just start from a little bit before the beginning of the parak on daf Mem Tes Amid Beis, and we're going to start from Itmar, where we left off yesterday, just to finish the parak. Let's read it. Itmar. Itmar, we learned a teaching. Avodah Zarah Shinishtabra, an Avodah Zarah that broke by itself. Somehow, let's say a hurricane came and it broke. So Rav says, Tzarech levatil kol kisam v'kisam. You have to, every piece, every wood chip, you have to nullify it. It's not enough that it broke in half. You have to nullify every piece. Shmuel says, Avodah Zarah eine betela elach derech gidulasai. And Avodah Zarah is not nullified only if that's the normal way it grows. In other words, let's say you have an Avodah Zarah tree, right? And that's what we're discussing over here. You have a big Avodah Zarah tree and the leaves start falling off, then the leaves are nothing wrong with it. Says the Gemara, Adarabba, derech gidilasa mima batla, if that's the normal way, a tree sheds its leaves, does that nullify the Isser Avodah Zarah on the leaves? What did Shmuel mean? Elihachi kama. This is what Shmuel meant to say. Ein Avodah Zarah tzricha levato ela derech gidilasa. And Avodah Zarah does not need to be nullified only if that's the normal way. If leaves falling off the tree is the normal way, only then you have to nullify the leaves. But if a hurricane came and knocked the whole tree down, right? So then, according to Shmuel, the tree is no more an Avodah Zarah tree. And the logic behind it is if a hurricane knocked the tree down, a real guy would think, well, this tree could not withstand and protect itself from a hurricane. How is it going to protect me? So that's why Shmuel says, if it's broke by itself, if it toppled by itself, that's it. You don't need an extra nullifications. But if a leaf is falling off the tree, then you have to mavatal the leaf because the leaf still remains aser. So leima b'hakami palgi. This is the machlekes between Rav Shmuel. The Marsava Oivdin L'Shvarim. Rav says that when a tree breaks, the goyim will still serve the broken tree. Umar Sava and Shmuel holds ein Oivdim L'Shvarim. When a tree breaks, the goyim are not going to serve the broken tree anymore. Answers the Gemara, no, lie. The Kuli Alma, everybody holds Oivdim L'Shvarim. Everybody holds that they would serve a broken tree. But over here we're talking about B'Shivrei Shvarim, Kami Palgi. They're arguing whether if it broke into a bunch of different pieces, so Marsava Rav holds Shivrei Shvarim Asurin. Rav holds that once it broke into many pieces, even if it broke into many pieces, it still remains Asar. Umar Sava Shivrei Shvarim Mutarim. And the others hold, Shmuel holds that if it broke into many pieces, it's permitted. If you want, I can tell you the Kuli Alma Shvir Shravim Mutarim. Everybody holds if it breaks into many different pieces, that means the broken pieces itself broke into another piece, that's mutter. The machlekes between Rav and Shmuel is the following. You have a Avodah Zarah made out of, let's say, Lego. And it's easy to put it back. If it comes apart, you can easily put it back. So, Marsava, keeping the heavy Yochel Hazir Loy Betela, Rav holds, since if the Lego got knocked down, it was a Avodah Zarah Lego, and then it got knocked down, but it could easily be put back together with no skill needed, so it's never nullified. Umar Sava and Shmuel holds ein Avodah Zarah Betela el gederach kedilosei dainu orche. Ha lav gedei vein tzrich levata. Shmuel says that the Lego falling down, the Avodah Zarah made out of Lego falling down, that's not normal. Even though you can easily put it back together, but it's not normal. So then you don't even have to nullify it. It's nullified by itself. But a leaf falling off a tree, which is the normal way, then that leaf still remains Avodah Zarah unless a guy specifically nullified it. Hadron Lach Kol Hatzlamen. Okay, we finished the parak. Now we begin something new. Hi, Lewis. We just began. We are on Mem Tes Amid Beis, and we're by the Mishnah. So I'm just going to throw up a picture because that's what we're talking about. There's something called the Mercury Avodah Zarah, and it's called in the Mishnah Markulis. It looks like this on the screen, but actually they would throw stones at this image, and somehow this god, by throwing stones at it, it created, it would give enlightenment in business and in the way to, it would protect you on the road. Another way, they would, if you wanted to make your own marcolas and you couldn't chisel out a man, you would make the image of a man, two stones on the bottom and one in the top. Okay, so let's just use this picture as a stone image of a human being, the god of Mercury. So Rabbi Shmuel says, Sholish avanim zu b'tzad Merkulis. You find three stones right next to each other. That's on the side of this Markulis statue. Asuris, all those stones are asur because they fell from the original the original statue. I don't know what it is. I mean, this original stone image. Ushtayim mutaris, but two stones are mutar. Comes along the Chachamim, and the Chachamim say sheniris imay asurais v'she'eniris imay mutaris. If the stones look with one eyesight, you can see the Avodah Zarah Markulis and those stones, then if there can be in one vision, then they're osir. And she'eniris imoy, if they cannot be seen in one vision, mutaris. It means if the stones are far away from the original sculpture, then it's mutar. So let's go. What's going on over here? We're assuming that the stones that you found fell off the Avodah Zarah. So Bishlam Rabbanan Kasavre, the Brana hold Oivridim Lishvar. They hold that a goy, if something falls off in Avodah Zarah, it chips off the Avodah Zarah, they would still worship that. So nearest imoy, if it looks close enough to the Avodah Zarah that you can see it together with the Avodah Zarah, the Ikalamema Minei Nafal, then you could assume that this stone fell from the Markulis, and therefore it's Asuris. That stone is asur. She'ein nearest imay mutaris, but if you cannot see that stone in one shot, then it's mutar. So because it probably did not fall from the Merkulis, it's a stone from somewhere else. El Rabbi Shmuel, my Kasava, what's the logic of Rabbi Shmuel? Rabbi Shmuel says if you find three of them, they're asur, two of them is mutar. If the goyim would serve broken parts, things that chip off the Markulis, I feel the tartin nami litzer. Even if two stones came from this, image over here, even if two stones fell off, then it should be mutar. If they don't worship something broken from an avodah zarah, I feel it plus nami loy. So then, even if there are three stones there should be mutar. And why does he say if you find three stones, they're asa? So how do you explain our Mishnah? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef Amar Rabbi Yochanan. If you know the stones come from the Markulis, the Viakol Asuris, then everybody holds its Asa. Even if you hold that Goyim do not serve broken things from an Avodah Zarah, that's by an Avodah Zarah, which is not served by stones. Another type of Avodah Zarah. The god of Mercury, the Mercury Markulis, the Mikori Taburi Tabar. The way it was formed is sometimes they form it by putting together a bunch of stones and piling it up in a certain way to make it look like a man. Two on the bottom, one on top, in a pyramid way. So Hainu Urche, that's the way that it's formed. So a piece coming off of that is not looked at with disdain, but actually they would worship such the piece falling off the Markolas. So if you know it fell off the Markulis, certainly it's asar. Ki pligi b'stoma. You find a stone and you don't know where it came from. That's the machlokes. Now, the Gemara qualifies. Nun Amud Aleph. B'mekorovis na'medik l'meimen nafal d'vi'akol usuris. If it's so close, within, let's say, a foot of the Avodah Zarah, so certainly you could assume it fell from the Avodah Zarah. So therefore, everybody would hold its asar. Ki pligi b'murchakos. The machlokes is if it's far away from the Avodah Zarah. Let's say it's more than a foot away. Says the Gemara of Betzad Markulis Katani, but if it's the Mishnah says Rabbi Shmuel is arguing when it's right next to the Markulis. So the Gemara explains my Betzad Arba Amas today. It's within 4 Amas. In other words, it's far away from the Markulis image, let's say it's far away 1 amma. It's more than 1 amma away, but less than 4 ammas away. So it's in that sweet spot between 1 and 4. So between 2 and 4, 2, 3, and 4. It's somewhere you find the other stone. So Rabbi Shmuel holds, interestingly enough, they'll have a big markulis, and they'll make a mini markulis of just 3 stones. So they'll make a brand new Avodah Zarah right next to a big one. And therefore, it's a new Avodah Zarah. Not that it fell off the original markulis. It's a brand new mini markulis. Shalosh the dam markulis. If it looks like a mini markulis, asurish shtayim. But if it's just 2 stones, mutaris, then it's mutar. Rabbanan hold ein oisim markulis katam mitzad markulis gadol. They would not make a small markulis next to a markulis gadol. Doesn't matter if it's 3 or 2, so it doesn't matter. If it's found between 2, 3, and 4 amas away from the markulis, it's still going to be permitted. Nearest, but if it's so close to the markulis, it's within a foot of the markulis, or 2 feet, asuris, it's also. She'ein nearest, but if it's not, mutaris. So then it's mutar. So going back to the Mishnah, that's the machlokes. Rabbi Shmuel is very machmir. He says that even if you find 3 stones far away from within 4 amas, but far away, more than 1 amma away from the markulis, Rabbi Shmuel holds that's a brand new markulis. And Chacham say, no, that's just stones from somewhere else. It so happens you see 3 next to each other, and they're mutter. The only time it's aser, the Chacham are going to say, is only if it's a stone that you can see it's you can see it's too close to the original markulis. So now we learned in the Brisa. Amamar. So now we're going to just discuss a few things about a Brisa. Biyadua Amamar. You said before, Biyadua shenashru mimenu. If you know for a fact it fell from the markulis, divrei hakol asuris. So if you have a markulis and you can see that this stone fell from the markulis, it would fit perfectly here. So you know it fell. Everybody holds it's aser. Says the Gemara Minu. I'll ask you a stira. Avronim shenashru minakolis. There's a Brisa that says, of stones that fell from the markulis, nearest imoy, if you could see it, even if it's close, asuris, it's aser. She'ein nearest imoy, that's the point. If it's like far away, even though you knew it fell from the markulis, but it somehow maybe a wind blew it a little further, mutaris, it becomes mutar. And Rabbi Shmuel Amishloish Asur Shtayim mutaris. But the bottom line is, you know it fell from the markulis, and nevertheless, if it's far away from the markulis, let's say it's 5 feet away from the markulis, the Brisa says it's mutar. And you told me that if you know for a fact that it fell from the markulis, it's aser. Amar Rava said, Loi teimish nashu. The Brisa has a mistake. Not every Brisa was perfect. The Brisa doesn't mean it fell from the markulis. You found it. The Brisa is talking about it like exactly what we're talking about. You're not sure if it fell from the markulis. So there, if it's not within 1 or 2 feet from the markulis, then it's mutar. Says the Gemara, V'sava Rabbi Shmuel Shtayim mutaris. Does Rabbi Shmuel hold that 2 stones found away from the markulis is going to be mutar? It's only if 3 stones. V'atanya, we learned in a Brisa, Rabbi Shmuel Oimet, and here the Gemara is going to turn everything around. Shtayim betfisa loy asuris. If you find 2 stones, and the Gemara understands tfisa loy means it's you can grab it. That means it's within 4 amas asuris. Shalosh, but if you find 3 stones, afilim ruchakais asuris. 3 stones, even if it's far away, if it's more than dalat amas, it's going to be asur. So we see this Brisa says shtayim is already aser if it's within dalat amas. Amarava like kasha kam betvisa achas kam b'shtei tvisas. You're right. Sometimes something could be within the dalat amas and there's no obstruction. So right, if there is no obstruction and if it's within dalat amas, if it's within 4 amas, Rabbi Shmuel says it's going to be aser. Our Mishnah is talking about that it's within dalat amas, but there's an obstruction. There's like a blockage between where you find the stones and the markulis. The heichadami, how's that possible? The ikagoiva beinu beinu. There's like a mound, let's say a mound of dirt, between the stone and that you find and the markulis. So let's say the markulis is to your left. You have a mound of dirt, and then you find another stone. So now you don't know if that stone it came from the Markulis, it's mutter. But if you find 3 stones over there, so then we can assume that if you find just 3 stones next to each other, that's a little mini Markulis next to the big Markulis. Says the Gemara, Markulis ki haigavlu mihava. If you have 3 stones next to each other, does that make it a mini Markulis? In order to be a Markulis, it has to have a certain shape. Well, Tanya, we learned to the Brisa, how do you make the stones of the base kulis? Is achas mekan, v'achas mekan, you make one from one side, one from another side, achas al-gabein, and you put a stone on top. So you make like a pyramid structure. And Rabbi Shmuel is saying, you don't need a pyramid structure, you need just 3 next to each other. So how do you resolve that from our Mishnah? Rabbi says, if you're making a big markulis, a grand one, yes, that's the way they made it. But the mini markulis, which is like a mini one next to a big one, so then they would make it even with 3 stones next to each other. So that just explains the Mishnah. Now the Gemara tells you a story. Bei Yana Malka Charav, the house of Yanai the king got destroyed. So the Greeks came, let's say, and they made a markulis on the place of it where he had his palace. So fine, they made a markulis monument there. Also Goyim Achrina and Goyim, other Goyim came. You see, by the way, this markulis seems to be a Roman and Greek god. I don't know. Also Goyim Achrina, so other Goyim came. The loy palchal markulis, they didn't bow to the markulis. Shakluni, they took all the stones. V'chipabem drachem ustar ratois, and they made roads and they paved the streets with it. So now it comes from the markulis. And therefore, are you allowed to walk on those streets? Ika rabban de parshi, v'ika rabban de loy parshi. Some rabbis would not walk on those streets, and some rabbis would. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, benon shel kadoshim mahalach aleim v'ani nifresh aneim. We have holy people who are sons of are the paradigm of holiness. They would walk on those streets. Why shouldn't we? Because I guess once other goyim came and made a street out of those markula stones, so they were mavatal it. So what's the problem? Why can't you walk on it? Why were people machmer? So first of all, the Gemara explains, who is a paradigm of holiness? Rav Nachman Rab Simoy. Why is he called a paradigm of holiness? He would never look at the image on a coin. Some reason the images on those coins in ancient times represented Avodah Zarah, and he wouldn't stare at it. So therefore, that he was called a holy person. So again, he would walk on the Markulis road, but not other people. So my Talmud on the parish. Why did some of them were machmir? How could you be machmir on this? Why should you be machmir on this? One guy came and took apart the whole Markulis. And says the Gemara, here, the Markulis is not just an Avodah Zarah, but it's like a slaughtering to an Avodah Zarah. You see, one can nullify an Avodah Zarah. Let's say an Avodah Zarah tree, you could chop it down and it's no more an Avodah Zarah. But once a guy slaughtered an animal for an Avodah Zarah, so then you can never eat from that meat, or you can never benefit from that meat because it never can be nullified. And how do I know that? Sacrifice for Avodah Zarah she'ela b'teila olamis can never be nullified. Shnema, the pasuk says, "Vayitzamdu lebal par vayochlu zivchei beisa." Ma meis eila b'teila olam after kavodas Avodah Zarah eila b'teila olam. Just like a dead can never be nullified, never becomes pure, so also a sacrifice to an Avodah Zarah can never be nullified. And therefore, since this service of throwing a stone was like a sacrifice to this Avodah Zarah Markulis, so therefore those stones can never be nullified. Umay Dilon Parish. So then why did people walk on it? Why were people not afraid to walk on that road? They would tell you, the only time a sacrifice to an Avodah Zarah becomes usher is only if it's like a service that was done in the Beis Hamikdash, like slaughtering an animal. So that animal, slaughtered for an Avodah Zarah, can never become nullified, whereas the Avodah Zarah itself could be nullified, but the animal can never be nullified. It will always be Asur B'Hana. But that's only because you're slaughtering an animal. But if you're throwing a stone, that was not a concept found in the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore that's not considered like a mace. It's not considered like a sacrifice offering, and therefore it could be nullified. And therefore they had no problem. So again, the story was that this palace of the Yanei Melech was dismantled. Goyim made a markulis of it. The Greeks made a markulis of it. Other Goyim came who didn't serve the markulis, took those stones and made roads on it. So, and therefore some people were walking on those roads. Amar Rav Yosef bar Abba, Rav Yosef bar Abba said, Ikla Rabba bar Yimen la'asrim. Rabba bar Yimen came to our city. La'asa aisim asnisim b'day, and he brought a difficult brisa in his, and he wanted an explanation on this brisa. Goy shehevi avonim min hamarkulis. A goy that brought avonim from the markulis. The chipa b'hem derachim v'tatois. A goy took the markulis stones and started paving a street with it. So the brisa says, Amid Beis, we go to Amid Beis, Nun Amid Beis, Mutaris, that you're allowed to walk on the street. Yisrael shehevi avonim min hamarkulis v'chipa b'hem derachim v'tatois. If a yid took the markulis stones and made a street out of it, a yid cannot nullify an avodah zarah. So therefore, asuras, those streets remain asa. So v'leis naga v'loy bar naga tefarkine. I have not a carpenter nor a son of a carpenter that can explain me this brisa. So he had a difficulty in this brisa, which the Gemara was going to describe. Amar Rav Sheshes says, "Allah no loy naga no v'loy bar naga no." I'm not a carpenter nor the son of a carpenter. Some reason during the ancient times, especially during Christianity, Yashka, considering a carpenter was somebody considered to have wisdom and practical intelligence. But Rav Sheshes says, I'm not such a person. Upakinale, and I could tell you this brisa makes perfectly sense. My kushle, what's your question? Why, if the guy made a road of this, if the guy made a road of this markolis, why is it permitted? Your question is Rav Gidil. Your question is, but it's a sacrifice to avodah zarah, so it can never be nullified. So even if the guy made a road out of it, it should not be undone, considered nullified. And says the Gemara, "Be'inan ke'ein panim beleka." The only time a sacrifice cannot be nullified is only if it's a sacrifice that is similar to the one done in the Beis HaMikdash, like an animal. But a stone to markolis, even though it's a sacrifice to the markolis, so to speak, but it could be nullified like the avodah zarah itself. So this brisa makes perfect sense. Amar Rav Yosef bar Abba, another thing. Ikla Rabba bar Yirmiyah la'asrin. Rabba bar Yirmiyah came to our city, and Rabba bar Yirmiyah la'asin aisim asnita b'day, and he brought a brisa in his hands, and he was thinking about this. It was like to sharpen people's minds to see if they could answer it. Brisa says, "Masliin umazahamim b'shviyas." You're allowed to unworm a tree, take off the worms, and put manure, zahimin. We're going to call this put manure on a wound of the tree. The tree has a wound, so to speak. If you put manure there, it heals. And you're allowed to do that on Shemitah, where you're not supposed to work the trees on Shemitah. These things which maintain a tree and protect that it doesn't die can be done on Shemitah. You cannot do that on Chol HaMoed. Kan v'kan, ein mezamin, ein megazmin. On Shemitah and on Chol HaMoed, you can't trim a tree. V'sochin shemen shel gizam, bein b'moed, bein b'shviyas. And you're allowed to put oil on a prune tree by the cut, whether it's Chol HaMoed and Shemitah. So Rabba bar Yirmiyah brought this brisa, and he said, no intelligent person can give me and explain me this brisa. So he brings the brisa, and you have to figure out what the problem with the brisa is, and then give him a teretz. So Amar Ravina said, I'm not a carpenter, nor the son of a carpenter, and I'll give you an answer. What's your question on this brisa? Your question is, why is it permitted to deworm or put manure on a tree, a wounded tree on Shemitah, and you're not allowed to do that in Chol HaMoed? So both Chalamoid you're not allowed to work, and on Shemitah you're not allowed to work with trees. So the Gemara says, Midami, how could you compare? Shviyas b'lacha asr rachmana. On Shemitah, the Torah says, don't do work. Tir chashari, but you're allowed to strain yourself to do something. Moed, but Chalamoid, afil the tir chanami asr. To bother yourself and do something strenuous on Chalamoid, that's asr. So that's why you're not allowed to deworm the tree, because it's a strenuous act, or put manure on the tree. So that's why in Chalamoid it's asr. So that's not the question in the Brisa. Vela, Ziyam agizim kakashalei. Maishna ziyam, why is on Shemitah, let's say, you're allowed to put manure on the tree, or maishna agizim, but you can't, the asr, why can't you trim a tree? Answers the Gemara, simple. Mi dami, how could you compare? Ziyam oikmi ilon v'shari. Zihum actually saves the tree from dying. Gizim, trimming a tree, avrui ilonai v'asr, enhances the tree, and that's asr on Shemitah. You're allowed to save a tree from dying, but you're not allowed to enhance a tree on Shemitah. Ella, the question is like this: Ziyam aziyam kakashla. He had a problem with ziyam aziyam. The Ketani, our Mishnah, the Brisa that he brought says masliyim, you're allowed to deworm a tree, umazahamin b'shvius, and you're allowed to put manure on a wounded tree on Shemitah. Reminu, I'll ask you a stira. Brisa says mazamin esenetias, you're allowed to put manure on young trees, v'karcha, and then wrap them, upwards so that the tree grows straight. The kite min, you could lop the top off. Voisin them button, you're allowed to protect them from the sun by creating an awning over them. Umashkin oisim, you could allow to do all these things for these young trees ad Rosh Hashanah until Rosh Hashanah. Mizamin is one of the things. You're allowed to put manure on the tree. Ad Rosh Hashanah and b'shviyas loy. It says even if it's wounded, only you could do it up into Rosh Hashanah and not of Shemitah, but not on Shemitah itself. So that's a question. Our Brisa seems to contradict this Brisa. Says the Gemara, V'dilma k'Rav Ukva bar Chama. Maybe the question was like Rav Ukva bar Chama. Rav Ukva bar Chama, trei kishkush gehav, echad levrui lanim, v'asav echad lesutumi pili v'shari. Hachiname, trei zihame haba. Could be, to answer the Brises, there's two types of putting manure on the tree. Chad la'oikmi ilane, if it's to help the tree so that it doesn't die, it's a wounded tree, you put manure by the wounds, that's v'shari, that's permitted on Shemitah. V'chad, putting wounds on a new tree, a sapling, lavruya ilane, that's to enhance the tree, v'asar, and that would be asar. So finally, concludes the Gemara. The Gemara is trying to say the Ela sicha sicha kashle. He had a question regarding anointing, putting oil on a tree. The Ketani Brisa says shemen sachen shemen lagizim bein b'bayit bein b'shviyas. On Shemitah, you're allowed to put oil on the trimmed part of a tree. Uraminu, I'll ask you a stira. Sachen es a pagvim, you're allowed to smear oil on unripe figs, umanakvin, umafatmen, and you're allowed to make a hole in them and fill them up with oil ad Rosh Hashanah. You do that putting oil on figs so that it ripes better and becomes like a juicier fruit. Ad Rosh Hashanah until the Rosh Hashanah of Shemitah. Ad Rosh Hashanah and until Rosh Hashanah of Shemitah, b'shviyas loy, but you're not allowed to do it in Shemitah. So what we see from here is that that you're not allowed to put oil on fruits, on the fruit in Shemitah time. So the Gemara says, Midami, that's right. If you're just saving the tree by putting oil on it, Vishari, that's permitted. Hasam over there, Pitume Pera, you're making the fruits more fatter. So that's Asr. So the question, Amalei, Rav Sama Bereda Asher Ravina, concludes the Gemara. Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah had this question. Sicha de Moyed, Azim de Moyed Kekashle. He had a question. You're allowed to put oil. You're allowed to put oil on a trimmed part of a tree on Chalamoid, but you're not allowed to put manure on the tree on Chalamoid, and that's difficult. Both michte hayukmi v'hayukmi, they're both saving the tree from dying. Ma'ishna hay deshari, ma'ishna hay da'aser. Why is putting oil permitted, and why is putting manure not permitted on Chalamoid? That's what Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah said. I have nobody who can answer me this brisa. But this whole story about Shemitah was brought in because of another thing that Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah brought a brisa regarding Markulis that he didn't understand. And now he brought another brisa he didn't understand. and we didn't. And that brisa remains in a question. Okay, we will stop over here. A good Shabbos, everybody.
Shabbos, thank you, Bob.
Yeah.